June 18th, 1944. Camp Hearn. The American guard did not raise his rifle. He held out a tractor key. For a moment the world narrowed to the space between the guard's hand and mine. The key was larger than anything I had expected, heavy, dull metal worn smooth where other hands had turned it day after day. It was not thrown. It was not slid across the ground. It was offered palm open like a question. I did not reach for it. Every instinct told me this was wrong. I had crossed an ocean prepared for shouting for blows, for humiliation. On the transport ship we had whispered the same stories to each other in the dark. America was a land of cruelty disguised as wealth of barbarity hidden behind smiling faces. The propaganda films had shown prisoners beaten worked until they collapsed, shot for small mistakes. Labor, we were told, was not work. It was punishment. It was how the enemy broke you slowly. So when the guard stood there in the Texas sundust, clinging to his boots, holding out that key, my first thought was not relief. It was fear. The field around us was wide and flat, stretching farther than any farmland I had ever seen in Germany. A tractor sat a few yards away, red paint-chipped tires thick as my chest. It looked expensive, important, the kind of machine officers would protect with their lives. The key felt heavier the longer I stared at it. In Europe, prisoners were not trusted with tools. Tools could be weapons. Tools could become escape. In Europe, a man like me would have been handed a shovel if he was handed anything at all. And if he dropped it, if he slowed, if he looked the wrong way, the correction came fast and final. Here, there was no shouting, no dogs barking, no rifle butt striking bone, only the hum of insects and the low wind moving through dry grass. The guard's face gave nothing away. He was young, maybe my age, his uniform faded from sun and sweat. He did not smile. He did not scowl. He simply waited arm extended as if this were the most ordinary thing in the world. Behind me, I felt the presence of the other prisoners. Dozens of us stood in loose formation, still stiff from travel, our boots new and unfamiliar on American soil. I could feel their eyes on my back, the silent calculation we were all making together. If I take it and fail, what happens if the engine stalls? If the machine lurches? If I damage something that belongs to them? I imagined the crack of a rifle, sharp and final, and my body reacted before my mind could argue. My shoulders tightened. My breath shortened. I waited for the trick to reveal itself. Instead, the guard cleared his throat. "Go on," he said. Not loud, not soft. Just a voice, flat with habit. "It's yours." Yours. The word landed harder than any insult. I reached out slowly, half expecting the key to be pulled away at the last second. My fingers closed around it. The metal was warm, not from the sun, but from the guard's hand. It carried the faint smell of oil and grease, a scent so ordinary it almost hurt. No one stopped me. No one laughed. No one raised a weapon. I turned the key over in my palm. It was scratched along the edges, used, trusted. This was not a prop. This was not theater. This was the real thing. The guard gestured toward the tractor with a small tilt of his head. There was no ceremony to it, no warning speech, no list of rules shouted for everyone to hear. Just the machine, and me. As I walked toward it, every step felt unreal. The ground crunched under my boots, dry dirt giving way with a sound I had never heard back home. The tractor loomed larger the closer I got, its engine silent, waiting. I could see dried mud on the tires, grease darkened around the joints. This machine worked. It mattered. I climbed up onto the seat, my movements stiff, awkward. The metal was hot beneath my palms. I could feel the vibration of my own pulse through my hands. Still no shouting. I looked back once, expecting at any moment to see the guard's posture change, to see a rifle come up, to hear a command barked sharp and final. He stood where he had been, arms relaxed, watching. Not like a man guarding a prisoner, but like a man watching someone about to attempt something difficult. The silence pressed in. In my mind, Europe rose up in fragments. Muddy roads, broken men, Orders screamed through smoke. Work details that never ended. The certainty that any mistake could be your last. Here, there was only the key. I slid it into the ignition. It fit perfectly the way it had 1,000 times before. My hand trembled. I paused, waiting for something, anything, to interrupt this moment. Nothing did. I turned the key. The engine did not start right away. It coughed a low mechanical sound that made my heart leap into my throat. I froze, certain this was it. Certain I had proven the propaganda right. Behind me a boot shifted in the dirt, but still no rifle cracked. The engine caught on the second turn, roaring suddenly to life, loud and alive beneath me. The sound filled the field, solid and undeniable. The tractor vibrated, power surging through the frame, through the seat, through my bones. I exhaled without realizing I had been holding my breath. The guard nodded once. Not approval, not warning, just acknowledgement. As the tractor idled beneath me, I felt something unfamiliar settle in my chest. Not relief, not joy, but confusion so deep it bordered on disbelief. I was an enemy soldier, a prisoner of war, and the Americans had handed me the power to move their land. As I eased my foot toward the pedal, one question pressed itself forward, heavier than the key had ever been impossible to push away. What kind of enemy hands power to a prisoner? I did not drive the tractor. The tractor drove me. That was how it felt in the first minutes, like sitting on the back of a living thing that could sense fear. Every vibration ran straight through my spine. Every sound felt too loud, too exposed, as if the machine itself were announcing my mistakes to the entire camp. My foot hovered above the pedal, unsure how much pressure was too much. Too fast, reckless. Too slow, suspicious. In my head, the equation was simple and absolute: one error equals death. The war had trained me well. I eased the tractor forward, the tires biting into the dry Texas soil. The movement was smooth, almost gentle, and that frightened me more than resistance ever could. I waited for something to go wrong, because something always did. My hands were slick with sweat. I wiped one against my trousers without taking my eyes off the field ahead. The rows were long and straight, disappearing into heat shimmer. There was nowhere to hide a mistake out here. No shadows, no rubble, no noise to mask hesitation. Behind me, I imagined the rifle. I imagined the sound, first the sharp crack faster than thought. Then the impact. The way the body folds before the mind understands what has happened. I had seen it too many times to pretend otherwise. A memory rose without permission. France. Winter. A work detail near a bombed rail line. We had been ordered to clear debris for 12 hours straight. Not because the line needed to be fixed immediately, but because the officer wanted to make an example of someone. A young soldier had slowed just a little, his hands trembling from hunger and cold. The officer noticed. There had been no warning. The rifle butt came first, knocking the man to the ground. Then the boots, the shouting, and the lesson delivered not just to him but to all of us watching with our heads down, learning what hesitation cost. Labor was never about productivity. It was about obedience. The tractor jolted slightly as the front wheel caught uneven ground. My heart slammed against my ribs. I flinched, certain I had done something unforgivable. My shoulders tightened, bracing for impact. Nothing came. The engine kept its rhythm. The field stayed quiet. The sky did not fall. I forced myself to breathe slow and shallow, and the fear did not fade. It recalibrated, looking for a new place to attach itself. If they were not going to shoot me for a mistake, then perhaps they were waiting for something else, a test, a moment of weakness. That was how fear survived, it adapted. Another memory surfaced sharper this time. Eastern Europe. Mud instead of dust. A labor camp ringed with wire and towers. We worked until our hands bled, and then we worked longer. The officers walked among us with an easy cruelty, choosing targets the way men choose stones to skip across water. A joke. A kick. A bullet fired not to kill, but to remind. Order was enforced through unpredictability. You never knew what would earn punishment, so everything became dangerous. That was discipline. Here, the danger was the absence of it. The tractor moved steadily now, the rows passing beneath me with mechanical patience. I became aware of how alone I was on the machine. No guard beside me, no shouted countdown. Just space. That was wrong. I glanced toward the edge of the field, half expecting to see movement, a signal, a raised hand. The guard stood where he had been watching, arms crossed loosely. He did not follow. He did not hover. He trusted the process more than he watched the man. The idea unsettled me. I focused on the task because it was safer than thinking. Straight line, even pace, hand steady. The machine responded predictably when treated correctly. That, too, was unfamiliar. In the Army, equipment was often blamed for human failure. Here, the machine seemed indifferent to who sat on it as long as it was handled properly. The fear did not leave my body. It settled deeper, coiled tight in my stomach, ready to spring. Every sound made my jaw clench. Every shift of wind felt like a signal. I realized then that I was not afraid of the Americans. I was afraid of being wrong in a place where wrongness had not yet revealed its price. Another flashback came uninvited. Italy. A quarry. Prisoners from another camp brought in as replacements. One man collapsed from exhaustion. He did not cry out. He simply fell. His body giving up before his pride did. The officer watched him for a moment expressionless, then drew his pistol and fired into the dirt beside his head. "Get up," he said calmly. The man got up. That was order. Here there was no pistol drawn, no spectacle of power. The Americans had power, there was no doubt of that, but they did not display it the way we had been taught. Power must be displayed. The tractor reached the end of the row. I hesitated, unsure how to turn without doing something wrong. I slowed carefully. Too carefully, my movements stiff with caution. The engine idled, patient. I waited for a command. None came. The realization crept in slowly, unwelcome and dangerous. I was expected to know what to do, not because they wanted to trap me, but because the system assumed competence unless proven otherwise. That assumption would have been unthinkable back home. I turned the wheel wide and slow. The tractor pivoted obediently. Dirt crumbled beneath the tires. The machine did not fight me. It adjusted. As I lined up with the next row, a thought slipped through the cracks in my fear. If they expected me to work, then they needed the work done. By 1944, even we had heard fragments of the truth through the noise of propaganda. America was fighting on multiple fronts. Millions of men were gone from farms and factories, sent overseas with rifles instead of plows. Crops did not wait for wars to end. Fields demanded hands no matter who those hands belonged to. The tractor beneath me was not a symbol of mercy, it was a solution. That understanding did not comfort me. It made everything sharper. If I was useful, I would be kept. If I was not, I would be replaced. Usefulness had always been the measure of survival. Still, the difference mattered. In Germany, labor was extracted through fear because fear was cheap and endless. Men were replaceable. Broken bodies were part of the calculation. Here, the calculation felt different. Machines were valuable. Time was valuable. Predictability was valuable. So the system was built to protect those things. And by accident or design, it protected me along with them. The tractor moved on, row after row. My body remained tense, waiting for the shot that never came. The fear did not disappear, but it changed shape. It became thinner, stretched across time instead of focused on a single moment. Suspense replaced terror. I was no longer bracing for impact. I was waiting for explanation. And as the sun climbed higher over the Texas field, one certainty settled in heavy and unavoidable. Whatever this was, it was not the world I had been prepared for, and that made it more dangerous than any bullet I had ever dodged. The guard did not shout instructions. He climbed up onto the tractor beside me. Not behind me, not above me, beside me. Close enough that I could smell dust and sweat on his uniform, close enough that I could see the scar running along his knuckle where skin had once split and healed wrong. He moved the way men do who have spent their lives around machines, careful and hurried with an economy of motion that suggested familiarity rather than authority. He did not look at my face. He looked at my hands. "Too stiff," he said, tapping my wrist lightly with 2 fingers. "You fight it, she fights you back. No insult, no warning, just information." He reached across my chest without hesitation and pressed the clutch down with his own boot slow enough for me to feel the difference. The engine sound dropped softened. The tractor seemed to relax beneath us. "Now," he said. He guided my hand to the gear lever. Not gripping it, not forcing it, just resting his fingers over mine so I could feel the resistance the moment when metal teeth lined up and slid cleanly into place. "Easy," he said again. "Don't rush it." I waited for something else. A lecture. A reminder of who I was and what I was. None came. We lurched forward, then stalled. My chest tightened instantly. Heat flooded my face. The old reflex screamed at me to brace, to apologize, to shrink. The guard chuckled under his breath. "Happens," he said, already turning the key. "Means you're learning." He said it the way one man says to another when a fence post goes in crooked or a knot comes loose. Not forgiving, not judging, simply acknowledging reality. We tried again. Clutch, gear, release. The tractor moved smoothly this time, rolling forward as if nothing had ever gone wrong. The field opened up before us, wide and honest. No hidden traps, no tricks. The guard stayed with me for the next rows. Sometimes he spoke, often he didn't. When he did, his words were short, practical. Listen to her. Feel that vibration. Too much gas. That's it. Hold it there. When I made a mistake, he corrected it immediately. When I did something right, he did not praise me. He simply let me continue. That was the strangest kindness of all. Back home, correction always came wrapped in humiliation. Officers shouted not because shouting improved performance, but because it reminded you of your place. Mistakes were public lessons delivered with cruelty so the memory would burn itself into you. Here, the lesson was private, between hands, between machine and ground. As we worked, I became aware of something else. The guard did not carry his rifle. It rested against the fence at the edge of the field, leaned casually in the shade like a forgotten tool. If I had wanted to run, there was nothing between me and the horizon but open land and the certainty that escape was pointless. He did not need the weapon. The system had already done the work for him. The guard told me eventually that he had grown up on a farm not far from here. Cotton and sorghum, a little cattle. He had driven his first tractor before he was tall enough to see over the wheel without sitting on a folded sack of grain. When the army came, they gave him a uniform and a rifle, but they could not take the farm out of his hands. "You treat equipment right," he said, patting the dashboard. "It treats you right back." It was not philosophy, it was habit. The day moved on in pieces, rows, finished turns, made small corrections absorbed. Other prisoners worked nearby under similar arrangements. Americans, beside them, not over them. A strange symmetry spread across the field, enemy uniforms moving in parallel, bound together by the demands of soil and machinery rather than orders and threats. By midday, the sun pressed down hard enough to blur the horizon. The guard handed me a canteen without comment. I drank the water lukewarm and real and handed it back. He took it without hesitation and drank from the same mouthpiece. That, too, unsettled me. In the world I had come from, sharing was weakness. Distance was safety. Here, proximity seemed to mean trust. As we worked, pieces of America revealed themselves in quiet ways. Trucks passed on the road beyond the field, carrying supplies west, east, everywhere at once. Somewhere far away, factories turned raw metal into planes and tanks faster than we could imagine. Newspapers arrived each morning with headlines about men fighting and dying thousands of miles from this quiet patch of land. 12 million Americans were overseas. That number was impossible to hold in the mind, but its absence was visible everywhere. Fields like this one needed hands. Ranches needed labor. Crops did not care who won the war. They needed tending now. The guard said it plainly while we ate lunch in the shade. "If you can work," he said, tearing bread with his hands, "you belong somewhere." There was no ideology in the sentence, no politics. It was not offered as a comfort. It was simply how things were done. This country was not perfect. Even I could see that. The guard spoke of neighbors who argued about the war, about wages, about who should be drafted and who should be spared. He spoke of shortages and rationing of families stretched thin by absence and worry. But beneath it all was a confidence I had never encountered before. They did not need to humiliate the defeated to feel strong. Their strength came from elsewhere, from land that produced more than it consumed, from machines that multiplied effort, from systems that assumed cooperation instead of resistance. As the afternoon wore on, the guard stepped down from the tractor and waved me forward. "Your turn alone," he said. I hesitated. Old fear rose up sharp and familiar. He saw it and shook his head once. "I'll be right there," he said, pointing to the fence. "You holler if you need me." He walked away, leaving me with the engine idling and the field waiting. I drove. Not perfectly, not confidently, but I drove. The tractor responded the way it always had. The ground gave way. The rows straightened behind me. I don't remember deciding to laugh. It happened somewhere between the third turn and the fourth, when the tractor caught the line just right and the row straightened behind me like it had been waiting all along. The engine settled into a steady rhythm, not fighting me, not questioning me, just doing what it was built to do. Something loosened. The sound came out of my chest before I recognized it as my own. Loud. Sudden. Wrong for a place like this. It startled me so much I nearly choked on it, my breath breaking apart as the noise escaped. Laughter. I clamped my jaw shut immediately. Heart racing, waiting for the correction to come. Old reflexes surged. Laughter meant mockery, meant defiance, meant danger. Nothing happened. The field did not react. The sky did not change. The tractor did not punish me for the sound. It kept moving, steady and sure, carrying me forward, as if the moment meant nothing at all. I laughed again. This time, it wasn't a sound I tried to stop. It burst out of me raw and unguarded, cutting through the heat and dust like something alive that had been buried too long. My shoulders shook. My eyes burned. For a few seconds I could not see the row ahead of me clearly. I was not laughing at a joke. I was laughing because my body had remembered something my mind had forgotten, that work could exist without fear attached to it. That a man could make a mistake and not be destroyed for it. That movement could be its own reward. The tractor rolled on, and with it came memories that had nothing to do with war. My father's hands guiding mine around a tool handle when I was a boy. The simple satisfaction of finishing a task and stepping back to see that it had been done right. These memories arrived without warning, uninvited, and they hurt more than the fear ever had, because they reminded me of what had been taken. The laughter slowed, then faded into something quieter. My throat tightened. My eyes stung. I swallowed hard and kept driving, blinking against the sun. At the edge of the field, the American guard watched. He did not rush toward me. He did not call out. He did not ask what was wrong. He smiled. Not wide, not proud. Just enough to say he understood something without needing to name it. That smile broke whatever was left holding me together. For years, everything had been labeled soldier, enemy, prisoner. Every movement, every breath filtered through what it meant for survival. In that moment, none of those words applied. I was not performing. I was not enduring. I was simply there. The field stretched out in every direction, open and unclaimed. The tractor beneath me was one of thousands like it, built not to intimidate but to multiply effort. Somewhere far beyond this place, factories were producing more machines than I could imagine, planes by the tens of thousands, tanks, trucks, engines. enough to overwhelm entire continents. Abundance was a word we had heard in propaganda, always twisted into accusation. American excess, American waste. But here, abundance felt different. It was quiet, practical. It did not shout its superiority. It simply made room. Room for mistakes. Room for learning. Room for a man who had been reduced to an enemy to become something else even briefly. As I drove, the scale of it pressed in on me. Not just the size of the land, but the confidence behind it. A country that could afford to feed its prisoners well, house them decently, trust them with machines worth more than their lives. That kind of confidence did not come from cruelty. It came from knowing there was more where this came from. The laughter returned once more softer, now edged with disbelief. I shook my head as if to clear it, as if this were a trick my mind was playing to protect itself. If they treat enemies like this, a thought whispered unwelcome and dangerous. What kind of country are they? The question lodged itself deep, heavier than fear had ever been. The propaganda we had swallowed depended on scarcity of food, of dignity, of trust. It taught us that the world was a narrow place where power had to be taken and defended constantly. That mercy was weakness because there was never enough to go around. This place contradicted that lie without ever arguing against it. No speeches had been made. No values explained. The lesson arrived in grease-stained hands and straightened rows of earth. By the time the sun dipped lower and the guard signaled for a break, my laughter had drained into exhaustion. I cut the engine and sat there for a moment, hands resting on the wheel, listening to the sudden quiet. My body felt strange, looser, heavier, like something inside had shifted position and had not yet settled. I climbed down from the tractor, slowly, legs unsteady, and wiped my face with the back of my sleeve. The guard handed me water. I drank and handed it back without thinking. Our fingers touched briefly. Neither of us acknowledged it. Round us, the other prisoners moved differently now. Shoulders less hunched, movements less mechanical. There was still caution, still distance, but something fragile had cracked open. Not hope. Something smaller. Permission. Permission to exist without bracing for impact. That night, lying on my bunk, the laughter echoed back to me in fragments. It embarrassed me at first. Then it frightened me. Finally, it left me with a hollow ache that settled behind my ribs. Because laughter meant comparison, and comparison meant questions. If this was how they treated the defeated, then everything we had been told about strength, about enemies, about the shape of the world, was wrong. The thought followed me into sleep, heavy and unavoidable. I had not been broken by kindness. I had been undone by it, and there was no easy way to put myself back together again. The thought followed me into the next morning and stayed with me through the days that came after. Labor was not meant to break me. It was meant to return me to myself. I did not say it out loud. I did not even allow myself to believe it fully at first. Belief felt dangerous. But the idea settled in my body, the way a rhythm settles into muscle after repetition, quietly, persistently, without asking permission. Work continued. Every morning, the field waited. The tractor waited. The routine did not change, and that constancy mattered more than kindness ever could. The Americans did not congratulate me for showing up. They did not remind me of my status. They treated the work as the point, not the man doing it. That was the difference. Back home, labor had always been a test of obedience. The value of a man was measured by how well he followed orders, how little he questioned, how quickly he suppressed himself. Skill mattered only insofar as it served command. Initiative was dangerous. Responsibility belonged upward, never outward. Here, responsibility moved in the opposite direction. If something broke, it mattered not because punishment would follow, but because the work would suffer. If a machine failed, it delayed everything connected to it. The field did not care about ideology. Crops did not respond to slogans. They responded to attention. The first time I noticed a loose bolt on the tractor, I stopped without being told. I cut the engine and climbed down, crouching to inspect it. My hands moved automatically, checking tension, assessing wear. In Europe, stopping without permission would have been a mistake. A delay. A reason. Here, no one shouted. The guard noticed and walked over, wiping his hands on a rag. He knelt beside me, peered at the bolt, and nodded. "Good catch," he said. That was all. No reward, no suspicion, just acknowledgement that I had done what was expected of someone who cared about the outcome. That word "expected" changed everything. I began to understand the shape of the system I was inside. It was not mercy in the way we had been taught to recognize mercy. It was not softness, it was structure. The Americans had rules, many of them. We were searched, counted, assigned, confined. But within those boundaries there was room to act like a person rather than a problem. The Geneva Convention existed here not as a threat, not as a document waved in the face of guards, but as an assumption, a baseline. It said, this is how we behave, even when we could behave otherwise. I had grown up believing that laws were only as strong as the fear behind them, that without force, nothing held. But in this place the law seemed to work because people believed in it, not because they were terrified of breaking it. That belief showed itself in small ways. Tools were shared without counting every second. Machines were maintained carefully, not sabotaged, not hoarded. When something went wrong, the question was how to fix it, not who to blame. I began to see that the Americans trusted systems more than individuals. If the system worked, individuals could be flawed without bringing everything down. That trust allowed something we had never known: margin. Margin for error, margin for learning, margin for dignity. As days passed, my relationship to the tractor changed. It was no longer a symbol of danger. It became something closer to partnership. I cleaned it at the end of each shift, wiping dust from surfaces that did not need it, checking joints that had not yet failed. No one told me to. I did it because I knew what neglect looked like. I had seen what happened when equipment was treated as expendable when men were treated the same way. The result was always collapse. Protecting the machine felt like protecting the work itself. Protecting the work felt like protecting a small piece of order in a world that had lost most of it. The other prisoners noticed. Some followed suit, not because they were ordered to, but because it made sense. A few resisted, clinging to the belief that cooperation was betrayal, that dignity came from refusal. I understood them. I had been one of them. But the longer I worked, the harder it became to maintain the old equations. Obedience had not made us strong. Fear had not saved us. Control had not prevented ruin. Contribution, on the other hand, did something strange. It anchored you. At night, lying on my bunk, my body ached in ways that felt earned rather than imposed. The ache reminded me that I had done something tangible that day, that the field behind me was different because I had been there. That knowledge quieted something inside me that fear had kept screaming for years. I thought often about the scale of what surrounded us. Trains moving constantly, carrying grain-steel fuel. Factories producing more than any one person could grasp. Planes rolling off assembly lines faster than we could count. This country did not need to prove its strength through cruelty. It was already proven every morning when the sun rose over fields that would be harvested, factories that would run systems that would continue whether or not any one man believed in them. That realization was humiliating. And then, unexpectedly, it was liberating. If worth came from contribution, not obedience, then I did not have to erase myself to matter. I did not have to perform loyalty. I only had to do the work in front of me as well as I could. The Americans did not ask me to love them. They did not ask me to renounce anything. They asked me to participate. That distinction mattered more than any argument could have. One afternoon, a new group of prisoners arrived, faces tight with the same fear I had carried weeks earlier. I watched them from the edge of the field as they were assigned hands, clenched eyes, scanning for danger. I recognized myself in them, when one of them fumbled with a tool and froze. Waiting for punishment, I found myself speaking before thinking. "Easy," I said, echoing the guard's words from that first day. "Don't rush it." The man looked at me in disbelief. I realized then that something irreversible had happened. I was no longer only surviving. I was participating in the very thing that had undone me. Not ideology, not propaganda, practice. Work done openly, honestly, without threat. The Americans did not announce this as a moral stance. They lived it as procedure. And because it was procedure, it endured beyond moods, beyond personalities. That was the quiet power of it. The war still existed. Men were still dying overseas. None of this erased that truth. But within the boundaries of this place, a different logic operated, one that said dignity was not a reward for victory, but a requirement of order. By the time I understood this fully, the fear that had once defined every movement had receded into something manageable. It did not disappear. It no longer ruled. Respect took its place. Not admiration, not gratitude. Respect for a system confident enough to allow decency without fearing it would be mistaken for weakness. As I stood beside the tractor at the end of another day, wiping grease from my hands, I understood something that would have been unthinkable months earlier. This country had not broken me to make me useful. It had trusted me to be useful, and in doing so had given me back something I did not know I had lost: myself. I did not think about America as one place anymore. There were two of them. The first existed around me in 1944, solid and tangible, measured in soil and steel and schedules. It was the America of hands and habits of men who woke before dawn because something needed doing and did it without asking who deserved it. It was a country stretched thin by war, yet somehow confident enough to keep its shape. The second America did not exist yet, not to me at least, but I sensed it faintly like a shadow cast backward from the future. It appeared in questions I could not fully form, in contrasts I did not yet have the language to name. In the America I knew then, everything moved. Trains passed day and night, loaded beyond imagination. Factories ran without pause, turning raw material into planes, tanks, trucks, tractors, tools of war and tools of life produced by the same hands under the same roofs. Fields were planted and harvested by men who had never planned to meet a German soldier and now worked beside him without ceremony. There was argument, yes. I heard it in snatches of conversation, complaints about rationing, about pay, about sons and brothers overseas. But the argument lived inside a shared direction. The country disagreed while moving together. Trust ran through it like a current. Not blind trust, practical trust. The kind that says, here is a job, here are the rules, now do your part. And the system assumed contribution unless proven otherwise. Responsibility was not guarded like a weapon. It was handed out like a tool. That was the America that handed me a tractor key. Years later, long after the war, long after uniforms were folded and stored away, I would hear Americans speak about their country with a different tone, more careful, more fractured, as if the ground beneath them no longer felt as reliable as it once had. But, standing in that field in 1944, I could not imagine such uncertainty. This America did not apologize for its strength, nor did it weaponize it unnecessarily. It did not need to shout its values. They were embedded in routine, enforced not by fear, but by expectation. I saw it in the way returning soldiers were spoken of. Men who had come home not as conquerors to be feared, but as neighbors to be reintegrated. The goal was not dominance. It was continuity. Factories would retool. Farms would remain. Life would go on. The war, for all its destruction, was treated as a disruption, not an identity. That distinction mattered. In my own country, war had become everything. It consumed purpose, erased alternatives, demanded total obedience. There was no concept of after-only endurance until collapse. Here, even in the midst of global conflict, people spoke of what came next, what they would build, what they would plant, what they would fix. That forward gaze was perhaps the most unsettling thing of all. As I worked, I often thought of the families who lived beyond the fences. women running farms alone, children growing up around machines instead of fathers, old men returning to fields they had not expected to see again. This was not a nation untouched by sacrifice. It was a nation organized around absorbing it. Later, much later, I would hear Americans speak with nostalgia about those years, about grandparents who worked shifts that never seemed to end, who saved scraps of metal and string because waste felt immoral, about factories that hummed like cities, about towns built around purpose rather than convenience. They spoke of it as a time when things were simpler. From where I stood, it was not simplicity that defined it. It was coherence. People knew what they were for. The America I saw in 1944 trusted people with responsibility because it had built systems capable of supporting that trust. Failure did not threaten the whole because the whole was robust enough to absorb it. Trust, I learned, is easier when abundance exists not just of material but of confidence. Confidence that tomorrow will come. Confidence that effort matters. Confidence that dignity does not have to be rationed. Years later, watching from afar, I would hear questions rise inside that country. Questions about whether trust had been misplaced, whether responsibility should be restricted, whether systems built for cooperation could survive suspicion. Those questions did not surprise me. I had seen what happens when trust collapses. I had lived in a world where fear was the organizing principle, where obedience replaced contribution, where machines and men alike were treated as expendable. The result was not strength. It was exhaustion. Standing between two Americas, one experienced, one imagined, I understood something that historians might miss. What made that earlier America powerful was not unity in belief. It was unity in function. People did not need to agree on everything. They needed to agree on enough to keep the wheels turning, enough to let responsibility travel downward instead of upward, enough to allow a prisoner to become a worker without threatening the system. When that changes, when responsibility becomes something to be guarded instead of shared, everything slows. I do not say this as criticism. I say it as observation. The America of 1944 did not fear its own people. It did not fear its defeated enemies. It feared only waste of time, of resources, of potential. That fear produced generosity rather than cruelty. It produced systems that assumed the best until proven otherwise. It produced a confidence that did not need enemies to define itself. As the seasons passed and the war edged toward its end, I carried these observations with me like contraband. I did not know what I would do with them. I only knew they had altered my understanding of power. Power could be loud and brittle, or it could be quiet and structural. The first demands obedience. The second invites participation. When I think of those two Americas now, I do not try to decide which is better, which is truer. That is not my place. I only know which one handed me responsibility instead of fear, which one trusted a former enemy with something that mattered, and which one in doing so revealed a question that would linger long after the engines fell silent. When did we stop trusting people with responsibility? I never met my grandfather in the uniform he wore to war. I knew him as an old man with careful hands, hands that fixed things slowly and without complaint. When I was a child, he let me sit beside him while he worked, never rushing, never raising his voice. He did not talk much about the war. When he did, it was never about battles or victories. It was about a field. It was about a machine. It was about being trusted when he had expected to be destroyed. After he died, we found the letter folded inside a book he had kept on his shelf for decades. The paper had yellowed. The ink had softened. It was addressed simply without ceremony to the people of the United States. He did not apologize in it. He did not explain himself. He did not ask to be understood. He wrote only what he needed to say. He wrote that he had arrived in America convinced he would not leave it alive, that he had been prepared for hunger, for violence, for humiliation, that everything he had been taught told him the enemy would take what little he had left. Instead, an American soldier handed him a key, not a symbol, a real one. He wrote about how his hands shook when he took it, about how he waited for punishment that never came, about how the work itself done day after day without threat slowly returned something he did not know he had lost. He wrote that the Americans did not tell him who to become. They showed him how to work. They stood beside him unarmed. They corrected him without shaming him. They trusted him with responsibility not because he deserved it, but because the system allowed it. He said that trust did more to change him than any lecture ever could. The letter did not mention ideology. It did not praise democracy or condemn tyranny. It did not compare nations or weigh moral arguments. It stayed small. A tractor, a field, a man learning to breathe again without fear. He wrote that when the war ended and he returned home, Germany was broken in ways buildings could not show. Hunger was everywhere. Anger, too. People spoke loudly about blame and betrayal about who had failed whom. He did not join those arguments. He took work where he could find it. He fixed machines. He rebuilt slowly. When people asked him why he never spoke bitterly about the enemy, he did not answer directly. He only said, "They did not have to trust me." But they did. That sentence appears underlined twice. Growing up, I did not understand what it meant. I do now. I live in a world shaped by choices made before I was born. I inherited peace not because it was guaranteed, but because it was constructed by people who believed order was stronger than cruelty and confidence stronger than fear. My grandfather never asked anyone to forgive him. He never asked anyone to forget the war. He believed memory mattered, but he believed gratitude mattered more. So this is not an apology. It is not a defense. It is a thank you. To the farmers who needed hands and accepted enemies instead of letting fields die. To the soldiers who followed rules not because they were forced to, but because they believed in them. To the country that chose to demonstrate its strength by refusing to humiliate the defeated. History remembers who won the war, but my family remembers who trusted my grandfather with a tractor when they didn't have to. That trust shaped everything that came after. It shaped how he worked, how he raised his children, how he taught us that responsibility was not something to fear, but something to accept carefully and honestly. When I think about America now, I do not think first of flags or speeches. I think of that quiet confidence. The confidence to believe that systems matter more than cruelty. That dignity does not weaken power, it stabilizes it. That even in war, there are choices about how to treat the helpless. Those choices echo. They echo across generations. They reach people like me who grew up far from those fields, who live with the consequences of restraint rather than revenge. This letter does not ask you to be proud. It assumes you already know why you might be. It asks something simpler. It asks you to remember who you were when you did not need to prove it loudly. And as I fold this letter back into the book and return it to the shelf, there is only one question my grandfather left unanswered. One question that belongs not to history, but to the present. If war came again, would we still be like them?